If you're watching this, there's a good chance that you love reading comics. Unfortunately, for us comic fans, we can't spend every second of every day reading comics. I know, it's an unfair world. And since we have to spend at least some of our time working, driving, or doing other things that aren't reading comics, a few years ago I got to wondering how exactly I could fill that void. Now, I'm sure this channel is your favorite piece of online related comic content, but there's actually only so many episodes we have. And that's where audio dramas come in. My name is Jordan, and welcome back to another episode of Strong Collectors Comics, where we are going to be exploring this idea of audio dramas. Now, if you haven't listened to these, basically what they are, it's like an old-style radio show. So a lot of these, for the comic ones, they're adaptations of stories. Sometimes they're original pieces, but you have voice actors, you have dialogue, you have music, and it very much plays out just like an audio drama would with those kind of stories. And obviously, they're episodic. Now, there's a whole lot of different ones. There's some Marvel, some DC. There's even some Power Ranger ones out there. For me, I've been most listening to the Marvel ones over the past few years, and there's quite a few good ones, but these are some of my favorites. Specifically, 4 that I think you really need to check out, and 1 that you can skip. First on our list is Wolverine, The Long Night. Now, this one has all the makings of a classic Wolverine story. Logan has found his way to a small, secluded community and is trying to keep a low profile. Of course, as usual for Logan, not everyone wants him there. This goes without mentioning the mysterious animal attacks, potential murders, and government agents who show up, with a prime suspect at the center of it all, Wolverine. Now, this story has a unique setting of being in Alaska, which I think adds to the true crime feel of it. And I didn't love everything about it, which is why it's last, but I think overall it makes for a pretty compelling story and a good Wolverine tale in general. If you like this story, there is a direct follow-up called The Lost Trail, which sees Logan heading to New Orleans. And I'll let you take a guess at which certain Cajun might show up in that story. Next on our list, for number 3, is Marvels. I'm a big fan of the Marvels graphic novel, illustrated by Alex Ross. Dakota's a big fan of his work as well, which, if you've read that one, it is a civilian perspective of the early days of the Marvel Universe, starting basically at the beginning of the 30s, working its way up into the 60s. And this story in particular focuses on the first arrival of Galactus to Earth and the aftermath of that. Now, what's interesting about this is it's from the perspective of Phil Sheldon, who's the photographer in Marvels, and Ben Urich, a reporter. And the center of this story is the idea that Reed Richards is accused of creating a hoax in Galactus. So you get the civilian perspective, and it has the unique lens of that civilian story with some other cameos. So you get some other characters showing up, won't say exactly who. Now, I like this story because it does maintain the unique lens of the civilian perspective of the Marvels. And overall, it provides a pretty nice retelling of the original coming of Galactus and some of the events around that. Next on our list is Wastelander's Star-Lord, Old Man Quill. So this one fits into a series of interconnected podcasts where they started to bring their own take on the Old Man Logan universe. And it's not exactly a direct adaptation, nor is it a sequel follow-up, but more of a reimagining. But the basic premise is there. All the villains team up. They kill all the heroes, or most of them, and they're left to pick up the pieces. So this story focuses on Rocket and Quill, Star-Lord, returning to Earth after a pretty long trip away. And I didn't read this comic when it came out because it felt kind of derivative of the Old Man Logan formula. I always hate it when they start to just make redos and additions to what I think is a pretty good premise with the original Old Man Logan. But I really did enjoy this podcast. I think it had a really good voice cast, and for me is one of the best of the Wastelanders series, and provides some cool takes on that world. Because overall they did several of them. They started with Quill, they went into Old Man Hawkeye, you had a Black Widow, a Logan, a Doctor Doom, and then a complete series crossover. So I definitely think Wastelanders Star-Lord is the best of the bunch. And one that I think you can skip is actually Wastelanders Old Man Logan, which might be a bit surprising because that's basically the whole premise of the show is built around that. I felt like it was a bit of a weird retelling of that story. I think it missed the point of a lot of what made Old Man Logan really cool, in my opinion, and it didn't really add too much new to that story. So I think that one's the weakest. If you want to go through them all, I do think there's enjoyable stuff to all of them. And currently, I'm actually working my way through the very last crossover. So if you'd like to hear more thoughts on those, you can get caught up and we could check in on those. And finally, number one on the list is one that might not be expected because it's a little bit lower production value than some of these other ones, which are sponsored by Sirius XM. So they have a pretty big budget behind them. But this one is actually a fan production, which I think makes it all the more impressive, and it is X-Men, the audio drama. And this one has really great storytelling because it goes through pretty much starting at the very beginning, your X-Men stories, and adapting them from there. So really going way back to X-Men #1, you got the early core members of the 5 team, the first meetings with Magneto, the Brotherhood of Mutants, some of those even more obscure villains that we don't see as much today. And it gets a lot of those iconic storylines going up through into like the Chris Claremont new X-Men era, getting Wolverine joining the team, Rogue, all that cool stuff. And there's some iffy voice acting. I don't think that always lands, but I do think the writing is really good. It has cool narration that reminds me a lot of a comic, and overall is a pretty good adaptation. It's a particularly standout moment with the return of the Sentinels in season 2 that I think is one of the coolest things. I would love to see something like that on film someday. And this is nice because it's an alternative to not having to go back and track down or read a lot of the older books. That's for Dakota. He doesn't really like to read a whole lot past a certain standpoint, maybe in the 80s. But I think this is a good way, even for me, to get caught up on a lot of those stories that I may have missed, or maybe older ones that can be harder to access. And this does incorporate the X-Men animated series theme, which is pretty cool and brings its own spin on that. And this series is actually still going, so you could get caught up and be waiting for new ones as they come out. So those are my top 4 scripted audio dramas for Marvel. There's plenty of other ones. There's actually quite a few DC ones out there. Some of them I've listened to a little bit, but if you like hearing about this, you can let us know in the comments below which ones you'd like to hear more about, if you've listened to any of these, and if you have any suggestions yourself. So please be liking, sharing, and subscribing. And until next time, stay strong. If you're watching this, there's a good chance that you love reading comic books. Comics? You love reading comics. You love reading comic books. Comics? I'm going to go comics. Okay. Comic books. I better get at least one comment. This better get some views. Come on, guys. We could use them. Please like this.